All right, now that we have a better understanding of the brain, let's move downwards to the spinal cord. In this chapter, we're going to cover the spinal cord structure, how it's designed. We're going to look at these little things here that come out on the side. These are spinal nerves here that come out on the side. And then we look at the stuff, we look at a bunch of stuff that goes on the inside of the spinal cord, right in here. We look at, one of the things we look at is tracks. Those are nerve fibers that connect the brain to the spine or to the rest of the body. And so they'll go up and down tracks, and up tracks and down tracks. And then we look at automated responses the body has that they do over and over again the same way, and those are described in reflexes. From there, we talk a little bit about nerve plexi. I'll tell you what's that all about when we get there. And then we get into these nerves that come not out of the spinal cord, but they come out of the cranium, the brain stem. And from there, we finally touch on the part of the nervous system that deals with keeping our system in homeostasis. Remember that thing where the inside of the body kind of maintains an equilibrium, even though outside stuff changes. When we look at the spinal cord, it largely consists of these tracts, or these that consist and that have pathways in them, which are basically nerve fibers connecting the brain to the peripheral nervous system. So some of these tracts, the blue ones here, go up. They are the ascending tracts, and then some of them go down, and those are the descending tracts. Descending has motor function in them, which is doing things, and ascending has sensory function in them, which is feeling things, bringing information into the brain. On the side of the body, we have these spinal nerves here on the side, 31 pairs on each side. We have 31 that come out of the cord laterally and feed the whole body. So those are spinal nerves. And then in the lumbar region right here, as well as the cervical region right here, we got an area that is a little thicker. And that is an area that harbors nerve cell bodies and tracts that go into the upper and the lower extremities. So therefore, they need to be a little bit, there's more going on in those areas. The cord goes from around here-ish, more or less foramen magnum time or place, all the way down to about L1 or L2, where it forms this tip. See this tip right here? That's that tip. That tip's known as the conus medullaris. It's a cone sort of thing. And after that tip, the rest of the vertebral canal, those spinal nerves just kind of go down, or actually they're spinal roots, nerve roots. They just go down, and then wherever they need to go exit and go to the body, they go to the body there. That area here is known as the cauda equina. And the cauda equina, what that means horse's tail, in, I guess, Latin that is. The reason why the spinal cord stops before the spine stops is because when we develop, the nerve grows less quickly or less extensively than the spinal vertebral canal does. But this is a good thing, because what we can do now, we can actually go in this area here and take a needle and get some cerebrospinal fluid coming out of that area, and then we can analyze that for, see what's up with the fluid. Is it infected or not? Is there a problem with it? Or we can, of course, also eject substances into that area. When we look at a little bit more the spinal nerves, they come out between two vertebrae in what we call an intervertebral foramen. So inter means in between, and vertebral means vertebra. So it's a hole, foramen means hole, that is made by two vertebrae stacked on top of one another. Within the sacrum further down, in the butt area, we have the sacral foramen, or foramina, plural, because those are just holes in the sacrum. The sacrum is fused vertebrae. You could see that right here. They're fused vertebrae together, so the nerves just come out in the back here, And then there's some that come out in the front here. This is a kind of an interesting chart. What we can see here, we can see the areas of the spine. We see the vertebrae. And then below here, we see the description of C1 to C8, which is right here. And of course, immediately go like, wait a minute. We had 7 cervical vertebrae. We don't have 8 cervical vertebrae. And that is correct. That's where you can see that the C1 to C8 indicates actually spinal nerves and not vertebrae. And so this chart is a little bit misleading with that. So you want to be careful for that, mistaking that. But I like the rest of it. The color was nice. I like the coloring a lot. But this is in the cervical spine. There we have 8 cervical spinal nerves that come out of that part of the spine. And the reason why it's 8 and not 7 is because the first one comes out above C7, and then we count them down above the vertebra, above the vertebra, above the vertebra, until we get to C7, and the C7 spinal nerve comes out above the vertebra, but the C8 comes out below the C7 vertebra, and then everybody else is always named after the vertebra above, which means the nerve comes out below it. So then we have 12 thoracic spinal nerves, we have 5 lumbar spinal nerves. There's a lot of traffic. And then we got a few sacral and then coccygeals. They're not even listed on here. And that brings it up to about 31. This chart here is also kind of nice because what you can see here with the colors on the person, you can see the section that each nerve controls in terms of the skin. So they call that a dermatome. It's a skin area that's supplied by one spinal nerve. That's kind of cool. Now with that, let's go a little bit, what should I say, closer in the looking, a little more microscopically, and we're slicing a spinal cord through it, and we have this coming up right here. So when you look at the text here, the spinal nerves are derived from the anterior and posterior dorsal roots, which only then carry motor or sensory nerve fibers. So what that means is when you look at and you follow this spinal nerve right here, you follow this spinal nerve into the vertebral canal, into the intervertebral foramen, through the intervertebral foramen you go, and then the spinal nerve splits in a part in the front, the part of the back, and then a part that goes to the front of the spinal cord. Here's the spinal cord. The nerve that goes into the back portion is known as the posterior or dorsal root. And the posterior dorsal root here is blue, and that usually means it carries sensory nerves. Blue is often indicated for sensory in the nervous system. And so the dorsal root only carries sensory nerves into the spinal cord, and then most of them go up to the brain for processing and understanding what all that means that we just felt or what came at us. And then on the other hand, in the front, we're going to get this other branch, and that's known as the anterior or ventral root, and that goes into the front of the spinal cord and only carries motor nerves in there. And those are the nerves that actually bring the energy back out of the spinal cord. They don't go in. The energy itself, the nerve flow itself. So the sensory brings the nerve flow into the spinal central nervous system, and the motor branch brings it out of the central nervous system. This here is an interesting thing. Oh, let's look at it this side because that's where it's labeled. Right here, there is a little swelling on the back side, the dorsal end, and that's known as the dorsal root ganglion. And that's actually cell bodies. You see that little dot right here. That's cell bodies of all those nerves that bring the electricity and the impulse into the central nervous system. And so a lot of those cell bodies, they're all grouped here of all these different nerve fibers, and collectively they get a swelling going on, and then you can wrap that swelling, and it is more protected than if these were all cell bodies by themselves. So that's the dorsal root ganglion. And then after exiting the last thing here we need to talk about, when we get here, see, this is the spinal nerve, And right after we have this spinal nerve created and we exit the spinal column, the vertebral column, we go and split again into a rami that goes to the back musculature, and at this point, they're called rami at this point, and one that goes to the front of the body and the viscera. The front's usually much bigger because there's more going on in the front, and the extremities also go through the front, so that makes more sense. But those rami, when we compare them to roots, the roots are the things that come right out of the spinal cord, and they are either sensory or motor nerve information, and the rami are after the spinal nerve, and they carry both sensory and motor, so they're actually mixed nerves. They're just which pathway do we need to go to which muscle and which organ. Cool. The spinal cord itself looks quite symmetrical. You could see there's a right side here and a left side here. And we split that in the front. We have a deep, 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 deep fissure. Remember, the word fissure means a deep groove that goes all the way almost to the center of that, and that's known as the ventral median fissure. And in the back, we just got a little indentation. So we're going to call that, like we did in the brain, a little valley. That's a sulcus right there. Internally, when we look at the butterfly shaped gray matter, so, well, actually, let me back up. So, internally, then, we have these two structures. We got this inside thing that looks like, yeah, they call it like a butterfly kind of looking thing. And then we got the outside part, and the inside part is gray matter. The outside part is white matter. The gray matter is going to be cell bodies. That is kind of like in the brain itself. Except in the brain, the cortex is on the outside shell. But that's sensible because in the brain, the information needs to go from the cortex down to the body, or up from the body. And so it makes sense that the cell bodies are on the outside. In the spinal cord, the cell bodies are going to be more internally located because the nerves coming in, most of those fibers need to go as tracts up and then, of course, down the spine. And so those are on the outside. And cell bodies internally, they're more internally, are just sort of small integration neurons for processes that, a lot of processes that happen as reflexes that stay at the spinal cord level. And so they're more inside and not outside. So structurally that makes more sense, I guess. It's a little hard to explain that for me right now, I guess. But that butterfly shape, we can group that, those nerve bodies, we can group them into a section that's in the posterior side, or dorsal. Neurology often uses that old word dorsal. We got a lateral side, or a lateral horn. See, they call these horns. And then we got one that's in the front, that's ventral or anterior. And the nuclei in those areas are specific. In the back, we have sensory nuclei. On the side, in the lateral horn, we have autonomic nuclei. And in the front part, we have the somatic motor nuclei. You might have questioned, what is this hole here in the inside? And that hole here in the inside is you can see it up here, the central canal, and the central canal carries cerebrospinal fluid.